As a man who has lived for nearly 4 decades, my tastes have evolved and changed dramatically over the years. Part of this change comes from the social circles I've embroiled myself in. Part comes from the inevitable drop in free time I have in this horrible adult world. Part of it simply is a matter of trends and discovering new things I probably would have already loved anyway had I taken the time to engage with them way back when. I'm looking at you, Wim Wenders. But one thing that has been a constant in my life is the little buzz of excitement I get from a bit of news I wasn't expecting, even about things I didn't think I was still hungrily clamoring for, realizing that through all that time I've always carried a torch for those lost loves of eras past. So when it was announced that a follow-up to Phantom Brave is on the horizon, my ears pricked up. I thought that this game had been forgotten, abandoned to time. I'm so happy I was wrong. Now, you might be asking, Tom, what's this weird crusty looking game you're showing us, and why should I care that it's getting a sequel? Well, let me tell you all about it. The PlayStation 2 was a golden era for the localization of Japanese games, and in particular the output of Nippon Ichi Software. Following the success of Disgaea Hour of Darkness, a score of new strategy RPGs erupted from the publisher, featuring hand-drawn sprites lovingly brought to life on an isometric 3D plane, ludicrous animations that made every encounter feel like the season finale of a shonen anime, and numbers upon numbers upon numbers. It was tantalizing to a then teenage Tom who allowed himself to be devoured by not only these games but the spreadsheets, forum posts and FAQs that accompanied them. It was a good period to be a nerd, and the perfect opportunity for a young man with not much money and too much time on his hands to properly indulge in a pastime that was neither cool nor productive. I loved it. And what was great was that alongside the strategy RPG conventions of the Disgaea series, there were these weird, seemingly experimental other titles, ones that played around with the expectations settled by those 2 original series entries. Titles like Makai Kingdom and Soul Nomad, one and done standalone experiences that held the heart and soul of the company's motto of more is more. Disgaea would continue to be the flagship, a proverbial golden goose that continues to enjoy releases to this day, and Nippon Ichi continues to develop and publish a whole roster of games in other genres, but I was always a little sad that they never continued down the evolutionary path of those other weirder titles, and especially one game in particular that stood out to me even all these years later. Phantom Brave follows the story of Marona, a young girl who lost her parents and lives on a remote island with a man named Ash. Ash is dead. He's been dead for years, but thanks to Marona's innate ability to talk to the denizens of the spirit realm, they are able to communicate and cooperate. Marona works as a chroma, a sort of ghost-whispering bounty hunter hired to take on malignant spirits, and the bulk of the game has you taking on missions in neighbouring islands, building up a small army of spectral warriors to aid you in battle, and eventually, along the way, new revelations and bigger threats reveal themselves. The basic gameplay loop is very similar to that of Disgaea. You have a hub world that grants you access to an array of features, a shop, a character builder, a place to upgrade your skills, and more. You interact with the post box to be transported to your mission locations, which take place on a series of isolated maps populated by a cohort of enemies to face down. Each chapter usually has 4 or so missions culminating in a bigger challenge at the end and a narrative moment linking into the next. But this is basically where the similarities end, as the game seeks to host an identity almost uniquely its own. Phantom Brave excels in melding its story and themes with its gameplay. It's a game quite literally about brave phantoms. Marona is the only living character in the party, a state of existence both a blessing and a detriment, as her combat prowess is extremely limited, but she has the ability to make the incorporeal corporeal, summoning spirits to protect and fight by her side. She does this by confining these spectral warriors to physical objects on the map, trees, rocks, assorted flora, and other miscellaneous items. The qualities of the object are then imbued into the spirit inhabiting them, be that increased attack, defense, speed, and/or movement, but with the caveat that these boosts also come with a penalty to other stats. The logic is quite straightforward for the most part. You pitch your physical warriors to rocks, your magic users to flowers, and so forth, playing further to each unit's strengths unless you instead want to bolster their weaknesses. The spirits you confine to these objects have a limited number of turns on the map, map, so you have to choose carefully when to unleash them on your unsuspecting foes, but crucially, you can place them anywhere there is an object to summon them to, including the weapons you yourself bring into battle. Which classes of phantom you confine to which items on the battlefield is a strategy unto itself, and quite wonderfully, the chips don't always stack in your favour. Compromises must be made at times, especially in cases where the perfect confinement vessel is a bit too far away from the action. When time is not on your side, you don't want to waste it on poor decisions. There is another factor you have to consider in choosing what you confine your phantoms to. Certain items also have a protection status, a beneficial relationship to other items on the map, with some additional effects occurring depending on this relationship. Confining a phantom to a tree, for example, that is connected to another tree that gives it a boost to defense, and that phantom will, on top of the parameters already bestowed by their arboreal host, also receive a boost to their hardiness. Even Roughy Tufties need a pick-me-up from time to time. Think of this as Phantom Brave's take on the geopanel system from Disgaea, but more condensed and context-specific. And like Disgaea's geopanels, you also have to consider how this impacts the way you approach your combatants, for they too are bound and blessed by the same rules of engagement. Sometimes the smart thing to do is to get stuck into a bit of lumberjacking or tactical topiary or rock smashing to deny your opponent that little boost, even if it's at your expense too.
The other big difference to Disgaea can be seen almost immediately. There's no grid in Phantom Brave. Units move freely within a certain range, they attack based on proximity and area of effect. It's not an original concept, CRPGs have been doing this for decades, tabletop games even longer, but there's something very crunchy about how it's done here. These big, ugly geometric shapes plastering the landscape, altering their outcomes depending on the circumstances of battle, like you're a coder rewriting the rules as you go. I've never felt the rigidity of grid-based combat to be a flaw of the genre. Quite the opposite, in fact. It's a system that allows for precision and tactical thought. You know the outcomes of a spell or attack, even the ones that are to your detriment. In Nipponichi's grid-based games, a lot of the strategy comes from understanding the finite reach and scope of your attacks, not only allowing you to plan 10 moves ahead, but also to understand explicitly what perils you face from your foe. Here, things aren't so precise, but it is in that impreciseness that Phantom Brave's combat truly sings, because it gives rise to the beautiful art of fudging it, granting you serendipitous options like catching a foe barely by the peach fuzz to get a cheeky extra attack that probably shouldn't have been possible, or snagging multiple enemies in one attack by getting the angle just right. There's a chaotic, accidental element to all skirmishes that give the game a sort of faux kinetic feel. The maps you fight on are also imbued with a number of parameters too, different topographical effects depending on the ground beneath your feet. Some of these maps are slippery, and what that means for your units is that sometimes you'll overshoot your intended destination, sometimes by a little, sometimes by a lot. The boundaries of the world are similarly flexible, with one of the major hazards being that items and units can be knocked or thrown out of bounds, with penalties ranging from health loss to simply vanishing altogether for the rest of the mission. When you internalize the physics of the world, you can use these quirks to your advantage, wrangling solutions seemingly out of thin air. It feels like a magic trick, escapology dragging your sorry carcass out of the danger zone, or closing the gap for a final hurrah to exact the killing blow. Coupling terrain effects with these geometric attack ranges lends itself to a great amount of unexpectedness in the flow of battle, both for your party and for your foe. It gives you the option for more esoteric strategies, ones that allow you to wring every drop out of every option, mitigating your own limitations, but at the same time only possible because of them. Each of these elements couples and combines to create the conditions for a very different tactical flow to what we are used to in strategy RPGs. It's far more reactive. You'll need to change up your strategies on the fly, and there's a scrappiness to proceedings that goes hand in hand with the story being told. Where Disgaea in most scenarios encouraged a sort of mad rush at the beginning, summoning an entire party from the base panel to attack and dethrone God, albeit with infinite time to plan and coordinate your moves, Phantom Brave's system, its constraints and benefits, imbues its maps with a dynamic quality that gives each mission a more organic tactical feel. You have to play the long game in these fights. It's all good and well busting out the big guns right away, but what happens when their time is up and you're still left with cannon fodder to take care of, or worse? There's something undeniably interesting about a strategy system that doesn't always do what it's told. It captures something unique about the relationship the player has to this game, a world wherein its inhabitants sort of have lives of their own. You see this more explicitly whenever you return to your base island, with individual phantoms having done their own things like raising money or objects gaining mana while you are away. You see this in how untethered and ill-defined the concept of a weapon is, ranging from sword and stave to the floral, sea life, and even the scuffed corpses of your foes and allies alike. Each with its own set of parameters and skills, treated as separate entities unto themselves and factored into the unit confine limit, meaning that choices have to be made even about whether you tool up in the first place or make use of what's lying around when you get there so that you can have more bodies on the battlefield. You see it in the fact that your strategies are very much contingent on what you're facing and what you can confine your units to. And I think it's no coincidence that Morona, your squadron commander, your tactical lead for all these burly brawls, is a young girl. Enthusiastic but naive. The system matches the narrative, a tale of a scrappy young lass and her army of spirit warriors clambering across an insecure and volatile battlefield and against a foe that knows all the same tricks that you do. It's brilliant, and what excited me the most about the reveal trailer for Phantom Brave: The Lost Hero is that this long-awaited sequel seems to be leaning even further into the unique environmental elements of that first game, this time with a bit of a dastardly, piratical twist. It honestly feels like a breath of fresh air to see this again so long after Phantom Brave's original release, because my relationship with these games has been waning recently, and I had thought that I'd completely fallen out of love with them. Many years ago I made a video detailing what I consider the biggest problem of the Disgaea series, its obsession with numbers, eventually to the detriment of strategy, the exponential burst of digits into the hundreds of thousands, millions, billions, and eventually figures that require algebraic symbology to effectively represent them, ultimately became the central conceit of the franchise that went on to determine almost all strategy in those games. It's an issue I knew could never be resolved because it's something that most fans actually really relish about these games, a matter of taste rather than some more formal criticism, but something I found myself tiring of nonetheless. I had thought in the interstitial years since that video came out that my relationship with Nippon Ichi's body of work was well and truly over, that maybe I was too old to enjoy these games. I never finished Disgaea 6, I didn't even pick up 7, I had moved on to different fascinations. In spite of this more recent malaise and nearly 2 decades since I last properly played it, picking up Phantom Brave again has reminded me that these games still have something to offer me. There's magic in what they do, these geeky, unassuming little games that end up being sprawling and worthy of obsession. I may not have the time anymore to fully dive deep into what makes them tick, but I'm forever grateful to rediscover Phantom Brave, back from the dead, one of the genre's most weird and wonderful entries.